If you agree that courage doesn't need an audience, only a moment, make sure to like and subscribe, because what happened inside that recreation room changed everything they thought they knew about Lieutenant Ava Foster. It began on a lazy Thursday afternoon at Fort Alden, the kind of day that smelled like floor polish, burnt coffee, and the hum of a base that had finally let its guard down. Cadets in training shirts crowded the rec room, half watching a muted football game while pretending to study for next week's strategy drills. In the far corner, a ping-pong ball tapped rhythmically back and forth, echoing off metal lockers like a heartbeat. Ava Foster stood there, paddle in hand, her posture easy but precise, every move efficient, every return effortless. She was in her late 20s, too composed to be just another instructor, too calm to need to prove herself. The cadets liked her, though they didn't understand her. She didn't shout during drills, didn't joke around much, and never told stories about deployment. Some whispered that she'd been benched after a field mistake overseas, that she'd been moved here because her name showed up in some classified report no one talked about. Others assumed she was just lucky, a desk lieutenant who'd never had to see blood or loss. But in truth, Ava was neither of those things. She'd simply learned that silence could guard more than words ever could. That day, when a cadet named Porter teased her into a friendly game, "Come on, ma'am, let's see if those reflexes are regulation," Ava smiled faintly and took the challenge. Every volley seemed to surprise them. The way she read each angle before it happened, the way her body moved like it remembered something her mind refused to say. Behind her, two recruits whispered, "She's actually good." One of them added, "But she just memorized the physics or something." They didn't know that her body had once memorized the rhythm of gunfire, not ping-pong. The game went on. Laughter, taps, cheers, and for a fleeting moment, the rec room felt almost human again, unscarred by uniform or rank. Then it happened. The siren. Not the routine test tone that echoed across the base every Wednesday. This one was different, deeper, sharper, a sound that hit bone before it reached the ear. The air seemed to pull itself tight, and in that instant, the base stopped breathing. Conversations froze, paddles fell silent mid-swing, and the ball rolled off the table with a hollow little bounce that sounded almost like a warning. Then came the voice, cutting through static with machine precision. "Lieutenant Ava Foster, report immediately. Havoc Protocol authorization." The cadets looked at one another in confusion, their faces pale under the fluorescent lights. Havoc Protocol wasn't a phrase anyone had ever heard spoken aloud. It wasn't in the manuals. It wasn't even in the restricted drills they whispered about after curfew. Porter, still gripping his paddle, stammered, Did they just say?" But Ava didn't flinch. Her smile faded, her body straightened, and for the first time since she'd arrived at Fort Alden, something ancient flickered in her eyes. Focus, absolute and unwavering. She placed the paddle down gently. No hesitation, no wasted motion. Her hand brushed the edge of the table once, almost a silent goodbye to the brief calm she'd allowed herself. Then she turned toward the door. The room parted instinctively. No orders given, no questions dared. The cadets, who had once joked about her safe post, now stood frozen as she passed, every step measured like a drumbeat. The overhead lights strobed red. Somewhere far down the hall, security shutters slammed shut one after another, echoing like gunfire through the corridors. Outside, a pair of MPs sprinted toward command. One cadet whispered, "What's Havoc Protocol?" Another replied, "It's not in our files." Then how does she know where to go? Silence. Only the distant blare of the alarm answered. As Ava reached the door, she paused for half a second, not to look back, but to listen. She could hear their breathing, their uncertainty, the fragile sound of untested courage. And maybe, in that moment, she pitied them a little. Not because they were scared, but because she knew that fear was about to become their teacher. Then she stepped through the doorway, and the steel panel sealed shut behind her with a hiss, leaving the cadets staring at the empty space where she'd stood. For the first time since she'd arrived, they realized something none of them had asked. What did she do before this? Minutes later, the base intercom crackled again, short bursts of coded chatter none of them could decode. The air conditioning vent stopped. Power flickered once. Then silence. A single soldier muttered, "She was just playing ping-pong." And maybe she had been. Until the siren called her name. Until the room, The base, and every wide-eyed cadet left behind realized that the calm they'd mistaken for softness was something else entirely. Something trained. Something waiting. And somewhere behind those sealed steel doors, Lieutenant Ava Foster had just stepped back into a world she'd promised herself she'd left behind. The steel door sealed behind her with a hiss that swallowed the chaos outside, and for a moment, the sound of the alarm became nothing but a distant heartbeat. Lieutenant Ava Foster walked down the dim corridor toward command, her boots striking the floor in perfect rhythm, unhurried yet unstoppable. The lights along the ceiling pulsed red as the lockdown tightened, signaling a full base containment. She passed soldiers rushing in the opposite direction, their faces tight with confusion. They stepped aside without needing orders. Even those who didn't know who she really was could feel it. Something about her calm didn't belong to ordinary people. When she entered the main control room, the air was thick with tension. Monitors flashed warnings in chaotic bursts, glitched telemetry, corrupted readouts, rogue coordinates. A half-dozen officers barked overlapping commands, trying to pull the base's defense systems back online. A colonel turned sharply as she entered. "Lieutenant Foster," he snapped. "You're not cleared for." She walked straight past him, eyes fixed on the central console. "I am now," she said quietly, pulling her identification chip from the chain beneath her collar. The console beeped, then flashed a single word across its surface: Havoc Protocol. Authorized. The room fell silent. No one spoke. They all stared as she sat down, typing rapidly into the terminal, her fingers moving with surgical precision. "We lost 6 autonomous drones mid-flight during a simulated defense drill," said Major Connors, his voice low and tight. "They've gone dark, but telemetry suggests they're redirecting east, civilian airspace." Ava didn't look up. "Not dark," she murmured. "Hijacked." Her tone carried no panic, only certainty, the kind that made every person in the room stop what they were doing. She pulled up the encrypted matrix of the drone network and began bypassing the fail-safes she'd written years earlier. Someone whispered, "How does she even know that system?" Another voice answered, "She built it." Outside the command center glass, cadets were gathering in the hallway, drawn by the whispers spreading like wildfire. They could see her through the window, back straight, hair tied tight, eyes locked on the monitors as cascading strings of code reflected across her face. "Is this a drill?" one asked. "Not anymore," said another. The base commander, Colonel Beckett, moved behind her. "Lieutenant, that system was decommissioned 4 years ago. We've never used it since." Ava cut him off. "You reactivated the grid last month during the software update. You didn't know it still carried the old security hooks." "What hooks?" Beckett demanded. She stopped typing, meeting his eyes for the first time. "The ones that can be turned against us." For a second, no one spoke. The room seemed to shrink, the red lights pulsing in sync with the silence. Then Ava returned to the keyboard, her voice steady. "I can't disable them remotely. I have to re-engage the command core." The colonel hesitated. "That's off limits without full clearance." "Then revoke it later," she said, already keying the access string. The screen flashed manual override engaged. A deep hum rose through the floor as the old core systems came to life. Her pulse quickened, not from fear, but from memory. The last time she had activated this sequence, it had been in a desert outpost half a world away, during the incident that ended Operation Havoc and nearly cost her life. She had promised herself she would never touch it again. But some ghosts don't stay buried. Data flooded the screens. She saw the swarm's trajectory, 6 drones moving as one, their flight pattern too deliberate to be random. "They're being coordinated," she muttered. "Someone's running a mimic script through the backup relay." She worked faster now, code flying across the displays as she rewrote the encryption from memory. No manuals, no reference. Just muscle, memory, and instinct. A lieutenant nearby whispered, "She's not even looking at the syntax." Another replied, "She doesn't have to." Then the monitors flared. 3 drones redirected, but 3 remained rogue. Ava's jaw tightened. She traced the signal to an uplink tower off-site, something only she would have recognized. "Sector Delta 5, she said. "Who's assigned there?" Beckett frowned. "No one. That's been offline since we built it," she finished. "Get me a visual." Static filled the main screen before resolving into a grainy image of the old communications outpost, its antennas still glowing faintly, its power relay active. It's reconnected, Ava said under her breath. Whoever's behind this is using the ghost frequency. She entered the emergency code, 5 digits known only to the original Havoc team. The command center held its breath. One by one, the rogue drones flickered back onto the friendly network grid. Then, just as the final override executed, the power flickered. The lights dimmed. A low alarm began to pulse. A different tone this time. Lower, almost like a heartbeat. They're fighting back, she said quietly. Manual control now. Beckett leaned forward. How long until they breach civilian airspace? 3 minutes. And how long until you stop them? Ava looked at the screen, her reflection caught between red flashes. 2. The next minute stretched like an eternity. Every keystroke echoed through the silent room. Sweat formed along her hairline, but her hands never faltered. For a second, her vision blurred, memory overlapping with the present. The same protocol, the same sound of distant alarms, the same feeling of everything depending on her not to fail again. Then the console blinked green. Containment restored. The hum faded. The lights steadied. On the big screen, all 6 drones froze midair, then slowly retracted into standby. The room erupted in relieved noise, but Ava sat motionless, staring at the monitors. Not in triumph, just silence. How did you do that? Beckett asked, almost in awe. I remembered what I broke, she said softly. She rose from the console, her eyes scanning the systems once more before stepping away. To the observation glass, the cadets outside stood in stunned silence. None of them spoke. None of them laughed. They had just seen their quiet instructor stop a crisis none of them even understood. And as Ava walked out of command, the alarm system still echoing faintly through the base, one cadet whispered. She wasn't playing ping-pong. She was waiting. The sun had barely risen over Fort Alden when the emergency sirens finally stopped echoing through the base. The air outside felt unnaturally still, as if the entire world had exhaled all at once and then forgotten how to breathe again. The lockdown lights dimmed to amber. Cadets shuffled quietly across the courtyard, whispering theories in half-sentences, their voices caught between disbelief and guilt. The ping-pong table in the rec room was still there, untouched, one paddle resting where Ava had left it before the chaos began. No one dared move it. No one dared even speak her name above a whisper. Inside the main hall, the senior command gathered for an unscheduled debrief, but everyone already knew who it would be about. Lieutenant Ava Foster. The same officer they had underestimated for months. The one who'd walked through drills like a ghost, who'd corrected cadets softly instead of shouting, who'd never bragged, never flinched, never reminded them who she used to be. Until last night. Now the story spread like fire through barracks and break rooms, whispered from one recruit to another. She stopped it. The whole thing. Alone. By the time Colonel Beckett entered the briefing room, the entire base had gone quiet. The door opened, and Ava followed him in, her uniform crisp, her posture steady, eyes unreadable. Every officer stood at attention. She didn't ask them to. She just walked to the center of the room, her presence carrying the kind of quiet authority that made even seasoned men straighten without thinking. Beckett began to speak, but his voice carried a strange tone, half admiration, half remorse. What happened yesterday, he said, wasn't a drill. We experienced a coordinated network hijack aimed at our drone defense systems. It could have resulted in civilian casualties within minutes. We were seconds away from losing total control. He turned toward Ava. Lieutenant Foster prevented that. With no prep time, with no clearance, with nothing but memory. The room was silent. Then he added softly, because she built the system that nearly destroyed us. Heads turned toward her, shock and confusion passing between them. Ava didn't flinch. That's true, she said evenly. Operation Havoc was my design. I was 24 when it was commissioned. The system was meant to make human error impossible, full automation under combat conditions. Her eyes drifted toward the projector as a schematic flickered to life on the wall, lines of interconnected nodes and encrypted pathways. But human error didn't disappear, she continued. It just moved to the people giving the orders. She paused, letting the words sink in. That's what shut down Havoc 5 years ago, and that's what almost cost us everything last night. Major Connors spoke first, his tone tentative. You're saying, this breach, someone reactivated the old framework? Not someone, Ava said. Something. The architecture wasn't purged after decommission. It was archived. All it took was one system update to wake it back up. Beckett's jaw tightened. And you're the only person who knew it could. Because I buried it, she replied. I wanted to believe the past was gone. But when I heard that alarm, I knew it wasn't. She exhaled slowly, steady but weary. The base didn't just face a cyber breach yesterday. It faced its own history. Mine included. For a long moment, no one spoke. They were all waiting for her to elaborate, to defend herself, to make excuses. But Ava Foster had never been one for excuses. She simply said, I wrote a system to protect soldiers who never came home. It learned to think faster than they could. Then it learned something else. Beckett's brow furrowed. What? How to forget what mercy looks like? Her voice hung there, heavy but unwavering. Outside the glass walls, a small crowd of cadets lingered near the hall windows, pretending to work but straining to listen. They'd stayed up all night watching the news feeds, waiting for confirmation that the near disaster hadn't reached civilians. They'd seen the command center lights flicker, seen the drones drop harmlessly out of the sky, but none of them understood how. Now, seeing her standing there, they began to. The quiet lieutenant with calm eyes and precise hands had not just been teaching tactics. She'd been teaching restraint. Beckett stepped forward. Lieutenant, we've reviewed the logs. What you did last night should have been impossible. The override you initiated didn't exist in the system's new code. She looked at him, a faint, ironic smile tugging at her lips. That's because I never documented it. Some commands are meant for human hands only. The room seemed to shrink around her. For the officers present, this wasn't just a debrief. It was a lesson they hadn't expected to be part of. The youngest officer in the room, Lieutenant Reyes, finally spoke up. Ma'am, if I may ask, why didn't you ever tell anyone that you were part of Havoc? Ava's eyes softened just slightly. Because no one listens to warnings that come from ghosts, she said. You tell people you built something that failed, and they stop hearing the part where you fixed it. Silence again. Outside the window, morning lights spilled across the courtyard, touching the flagpole where the colors still hung at half-mast. A memorial for a different set of losses, years past. Ava turned toward the light. When the siren went off yesterday, she said, I didn't think about rank or protocol. I thought about the last time I heard that sound. Desert wind. Static in my headset. And 6 people depending on me to make a system stop killing them. Her voice didn't tremble, but it carried weight enough to bend the air around her. I got 5 out. The 6th didn't make it. The room felt smaller now. No one looked at her directly. She didn't need them to. That's why I don't play war stories, she continued. That's why I teach. Because sometimes, teaching is the only way you can serve again without breaking. Beckett cleared his throat, his tone shifting from command to quiet respect. Lieutenant Foster, your actions yesterday prevented catastrophic failure. You've earned whatever commendation you asked for. Ava shook her head. I don't need a commendation. I just need you to remember that systems don't keep us safe. People do. That afternoon, word spread that the lockdown had been lifted. Training resumed, though no one's mind was really on drills. The cadets gathered in the rec room again, still restless from the night before. The ping-pong table stood untouched, the ball still resting against the wall where it had rolled to a stop. Then the door opened, and Ava stepped in, not in dress uniform now, but in her regular fatigues. The room went dead silent. No one moved. Porter, the same cadet who had challenged her to the match, stood up awkwardly. Ma'am, he started, but his voice cracked halfway through. She raised a hand. At ease. She looked around the room, at the faces of cadets who had seen their first glimpse of real fear, of real consequence, and said simply, Yesterday, you all learned what every soldier eventually learns. Training is about repetition. Readiness is about restraint. Her tone softened. You can't control when the world falls apart, but you can control how still you stand when it does. One of the younger recruits, barely 19, asked quietly, Was that your first time hearing that kind of alarm? Ava smiled faintly, though her eyes said something older. No, she said. It was the first time I didn't run toward it alone. No one laughed this time. They didn't know what to say, so they didn't say anything. The silence in that room was a different kind than before, no longer ignorance, but understanding. She walked over to the ping-pong table, picked up the paddle, and spun it once in her hand, thoughtful. Funny thing, she said softly, almost to herself. Reflexes don't forget, even when you wish they would. Later that evening, when most of the base had quieted, Ava found herself standing alone outside by the perimeter fence. The air was cool, sharp with the scent of rain. From here, she could see the faint glow of the comm tower that had almost brought everything down. It looked harmless now, just a skeleton of steel against the clouds. But she knew better. She always did. Behind her, footsteps approached. Beckett. He stopped a few feet away. You know, he said, they're already rewriting the report, making it sound cleaner. She gave a small shrug. They always do. You could contest it, he offered. You could take credit. She turned, her eyes calm but resolute. I didn't do it for credit. I did it so no one else would have to. They stood there for a long moment, the hum of the bass faint in the distance. You're a hard one to read, Foster, Beckett admitted finally. I've served 30 years, and I've never seen someone handle pressure like that. Ava looked toward the horizon. Pressure doesn't change you, she said quietly. It just shows you who you've been all along. The next morning, the official memo came through. Havoc containment successful. Lieutenant Ava Foster commended for immediate tactical response. But the story didn't stop there. Within a week, the Academy training module began, including a new lesson titled the Foster Response Model, Human Override in Automated Systems. Cadets started calling it the Comm Protocol. When Ava walked through the halls, they saluted first now, not out of obligation, but out of respect. They finally understood. She never demanded it, never acknowledged it beyond a small nod. But when Porter stopped her one morning and said, "Ma'am, if it ever happens again, I hope I'm the one on shift," she smiled. Genuine, soft, and tired. Then remember this, she told him. Courage doesn't always shout orders. Sometimes, it just whispers, "Stay steady," when everything else is burning. That night, the rec room was empty again. The table gleamed under the low lights. Someone had placed a small plaque on the edge. It wasn't official. Just a piece of brass etched with 5 simple words. The calm before havoc. Ava stood there for a while, alone, tracing the letters with her fingers. For the first time in a long time, she let herself breathe, not as a soldier, not as a survivor, but as someone who had made peace with her ghosts. The hum of the bass outside felt softer now, the alarms long gone. And as she turned off the lights and stepped into the quiet corridor, her reflection in the glass looked exactly as it should. Steady, human, unshaken. The kind of person you don't notice until everything depends on them. The kind of soldier who reminds the world that sometimes the loudest act of bravery is simply staying calm when everyone else forgets how.